Most people have never heard of Robert Cowboy Stout. Yet every Marine who survived the Battle of Peleliu, even if they never knew his name, owes their life to him. On the 12th of September 1944, Stout was ordered to do something simple: take pictures. Instead, he did something no pilot was trained or allowed to do. He disobeyed. And in 8 minutes, he erased an entire Japanese airfield, 40 planes, and rewrote U.S. naval doctrine. But here's the part few realize. He wasn't some reckless cowboy chasing glory. He was a man staring at a flaw in the entire Allied intelligence system and deciding whether to fix it or let thousands die because he followed orders. That decision became one of the most studied cases in modern military strategy. The day a reconnaissance pilot proved that initiative matters more than obedience. Think about that. One man, one aircraft, 8 minutes, and an invasion that could have ended in disaster instead became a victory. The textbooks call it aggressive heroism. But military historians today call it something else: the moment the Navy realized bureaucracy can kill. So what really happened above Peleliu? Why did every layer of intelligence fail? And how did a single pilot, meant to observe quietly, end up saving 1,000 Marines? Let's rewind, not to tell a story you've heard before, but to dissect how it happened, why command structures broke down, and what Stout saw from 8,000 feet that no one else dared to see. When Robert Cowboy Stout leveled out at 8,000 feet, the war seemed far away. The Pacific below was a sheet of glass. The island of Peleliu, his destination, looked small, harmless, another speck on the map that planners in Washington called secured. That word, secured, killed men. It was the most dangerous word in every Allied briefing room of 1944. Secured meant someone had seen a few photographs, compared them with older ones, and assumed the problem was gone. No one bothered to verify. No one expected the enemy to be patient. From his cockpit, Stout saw what intelligence officers in air-conditioned tents could not. The Japanese didn't abandon airfields. They hid them. They learned that after 2 years of watching American pilots destroy anything that moved. By 1944, Japanese engineers were masters of deception, painting fake bomb craters, rolling camouflage nets over aircraft, and building decoy fuel dumps to fool aerial recon. But Stout's eyes caught the difference that photographs missed: motion, a reflection of light that shifted the unmistakable flicker of wings in sunlight. He banked slightly, letting the sun glance off the field again. The shape that appeared made his stomach drop. Dozens of planes, Zeros, bombers, and reconnaissance craft lined the tarmac like rows of silverfish. Fuel drums sat stacked neatly in clusters, and men in brown uniforms moved among them with the rhythm of routine. There was no chaos, no panic, just calm, methodical preparation. This was not an abandoned airfield. It was a loaded gun. And that single observation revealed something far bigger than one pilot's mission. It exposed a failure that haunted Allied command through the entire Pacific campaign: the belief that technology could replace human judgment. By 1944, the U.S. Navy had grown addicted to reconnaissance photography. Commanders made decisions by staring at prints, not by listening to pilots who had seen the ground with their own eyes. It was efficient, but it was also blind. Thousands of lives depended on what looked convincing in grayscale. Stout understood this because he'd watched the same mistake before at Tarawa. Intelligence had declared the beaches clear there too. But when Marines landed, Japanese gunners hidden in bunkers shredded the first waves within minutes. The lesson was supposed to be learned. It wasn't. Now, staring down at Peleliu, Stout realized he was looking at the same arrogance, repeated, and the same death trap waiting to open. He counted quickly: 40 aircraft, minimum, fully fueled, fully armed, each capable of carrying 2 bombs or a rack of torpedoes. Even if half launched, it would be enough to devastate the invasion fleet before the first Marines touched sand. And the timing couldn't have been worse. The invasion convoy, over 100 ships, was already on its way. There was no buffer, no window for a new strike plan. By the time headquarters reacted, the planes below him would be airborne, and the beaches of Peleliu would become another Tarawa, only worse. He keyed the radio, then stopped. Protocol demanded he report, not engage. But the delay between report and action could be 24 hours. The Japanese would scatter, hide, or strike first. This was the flaw no doctrine could fix, a bureaucracy that moved slower than the battlefield. Up here, there were no maps, no committees, no second opinions, just one man, one decision, and an ocean of consequences. Stout throttled back, circling wider. From above, the Japanese had made a fatal error in their own efficiency. In their rush to prepare for the coming assault, they'd parked their aircraft too close together, surrounded by open fuel drums. A perfect chain reaction waiting for ignition. His training told him to observe. His experience told him that by the time he landed, the moment would be gone. And that contradiction between obedience and instinct defined every great battlefield decision in history. The U.S. Navy had spent years building rules to prevent recklessness, but what it had built, unintentionally, was hesitation. It was safe, predictable, slow, and in war, slow kills faster than bullets. Down below, a Japanese mechanic lit another cigarette. The smoke curled lazily into the humid air. It was the smallest, most ordinary act in the world. And yet, in Stout's mind, it was the match that could burn half the Pacific. He checked his ammunition. 6 50 caliber machine guns, 2,400 rounds total. 12 seconds of sustained fire. 12 seconds to change the outcome of an invasion. He exhaled slowly, feeling the sweat on his palms. This was the moment military academies never teach, when orders become irrelevant and judgment becomes everything. He looked down one last time. The airfield below was alive, beautiful, and doomed. The sky was calm, the ocean quiet, and in that silence, Robert Cowboy Stout began to make the decision that would define him forever. From this point on, the narrator's tone sharpens. The war would no longer be fought by orders, but by instincts. Robert Cowboy Stout had no illusions about what disobedience meant in wartime. In the Navy, orders weren't suggestions. They were lifelines. Every pilot learned the same rule. You don't improvise, you survive by following the chain. And that chain, from admiral to wing commander to pilot, was supposed to keep chaos from killing men faster than the enemy could. But in practice, it often did the opposite. Inside that cockpit, the weight of obedience pressed down harder than gravity. Stout knew the procedure by heart: spot, photograph, report. Let command decide. Let someone with a bigger desk make the call. That system worked fine in theory, until it met reality at 400 miles an hour. The truth was simple. War didn't wait for paperwork. He'd seen it before. At Tarawa, pilots had done exactly what they were told. They waited. They radioed back coordinates, held position, and let the bureaucracy move. By the time bombers arrived, the Marines below were already dead. The Japanese had been faster, smarter, and far more willing to act without permission. That memory burned behind Stout's eyes as he circled Peleliu. The same pattern was unfolding again, command behind the horizon, blind and confident. The enemy below, alive and preparing. He could almost hear the inevitable conversation that would happen hours later. Some officer at a map table, frowning at a grainy photograph, saying, "We'll verify that in the morning." But the war wouldn't wait for morning. He gripped the control stick tighter. His training screamed, "Don't do it." His instinct whispered, "You have to." That was the paradox of every veteran pilot. You survived long enough to know when the rules stopped working. And the rules, today, were wrong. He did the math quick, cold, precise. 40 aircraft, 40 potential killers, 12 seconds of ammunition, 2,000 rounds of 50 caliber Hope. If he could hit the fuel drums first, the chain reaction might do the rest. But might wasn't a word pilots were supposed to bet their lives on. Below, anti-aircraft batteries ringed the field, each gun capable of slicing his Hellcat in half if he came in too high, too straight, or too slow. The odds weren't just bad, they were suicidal. A single hit to the engine meant fire. A single hit to the cockpit meant silence. And yet, above all that danger, one thought refused to leave his mind. Those Marines steaming toward Peleliu had no idea what was waiting for them. If he turned back now, he'd be delivering them into a slaughter. That realization shifted something inside him. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't pride. It was responsibility, raw, personal, terrifying. For the first time, Stout understood that following orders could be the most cowardly thing a man could do. The Navy called it discipline, but discipline without judgment was just obedience in uniform. And obedience could kill more efficiently than bullets. He remembered his instructor's words from flight school. Your first duty is to return alive. But another voice, one the Navy hadn't taught, rose louder in his head. Your first duty is to make sure others do. He reached for the radio again, thumb hovering over the transmit key. He could call it in, describe what he saw, and hope command acted fast. But he knew how those conversations went. By the time approval came through, the fuel trucks below would be empty and the planes dispersed into the jungle. The window was closing with every rotation of his propeller. Then came the quiet. That strange, heavy silence pilots feel when thought ends and decision begins. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then Stout flicked the gun switch from safe to live. At that moment, something shifted, not in the plane, but in him. He wasn't a reconnaissance pilot anymore. He was an executioner of opportunity. He climbed slightly, leveling the Hellcat against the horizon. Through the gun sight, the airfield below looked impossibly small, fragile. He thought of the men on the ships thousands of miles from home, relying on the assumption that someone somewhere was watching out for them. He was that someone, and no order written on paper could change that. He checked his instruments one last time, oil pressure steady, flaps clean, ammunition loaded. Then he breathed in, deep and steady, and rolled the aircraft into a slow dive. Every pilot is told there comes a moment when duty and instinct collide. In training, they call it fog of war. In real life, it's the instant you decide who you truly are. Robert Cowboy Stout didn't decide to be a hero that morning. He decided not to be a bystander. At 9:21 hours, the narrator's tone tightens. Major Stout began his descent not for reconnaissance, not for orders, but for the kind of decision that wins wars and breaks careers. The altimeter spun down fast, 7,000 feet. Wuchen, Sanchen. Stout gritted his teeth as the island swelled beneath him. The Hellcat's engine howled a deep, metallic snarl, echoing through the cockpit. This wasn't reconnaissance anymore. This was a gamble with physics. At 2,000 feet, the humidity hit like a wall. The air shimmered, dense with heat and smoke from distant brush fires. Below, the Japanese ground crews hadn't even noticed him yet. No one expected an American plane alone, diving at full throttle, straight into the heart of their airfield. He lined up his approach, coming from the east, sun at his back, the oldest trick in the book. It blinded the gunners for those critical first seconds. The crosshair drifted across a row of zeros, parked wingtip to wingtip. He exhaled slowly and pressed the trigger. The 6 Browning 50 seconds erupted. A single continuous roar, tracers stitching across the tarmac like flaming threads. The recoil shook the entire airframe. The canopy vibrated as brass casings clattered off the wings. Fuel drums burst open in geysers of vapor. A heartbeat later, the first explosion hit. A flash of orange that swallowed 2 aircraft instantly. The shock wave slapped the Hellcat sideways, rattling every bolt and joint. He corrected with a quick rudder tap, kept firing, walked the tracers across another cluster of planes. 1-0 disintegrated under the storm of bullets. Another spun, half burning, half intact, rolling into a line of fuel barrels. The chain reaction began. It was chaos, beautiful, terrifying chaos. Fireballs bloomed in sequence. A domino line of destruction that spread faster than the eye could follow. The entire northern half of the airfield ignited like dry grass. Each explosion fed the next, and within seconds, A solid wall of flame tore through the Japanese formation. Ground crews ran in every direction, some diving for trenches, others frozen mid-step. Machine gun nests tried to open fire, but the sudden heat and shock blinded them. Their arcs of fire went wild. Stout banked low, cutting across the runway barely 50 feet above the ground. Bullets sliced through the air behind him, but he was already gone, skimming the treetops like a ghost. From above, the scale of destruction was staggering. He'd fired for only 10 seconds, but in those 10 seconds, nearly half the enemy aircraft were burning. Flames leapt 50 feet into the air. Fuel drums exploded like mortars. Smoke rose in thick black columns visible for miles. And yet, amid the inferno, Stout saw something else, the untouched southern row. 20 more aircraft, lined perfectly, waiting their turn to die. The temptation to go back was instant, but his ammo counter said otherwise. Half gone, maybe 6 seconds left. He climbed sharply, pulling 4Gs, heart pounding as flak bursts blossomed around him. Shrapnel pinged against the fuselage. One hit cracked the right wing root. Warning lights flickered. Oil pressure steady. Still flying. He leveled off at 3,000 feet, breathing hard, adrenaline flooding every nerve. The radio crackled faintly static, no voices. Command had no idea what he'd done. No one knew the airfield was gone except him. From this height, the pattern of destruction told a clear story. He hadn't just attacked, he'd detonated a system. The Japanese had made the same mistake the Luftwaffe once did. Efficiency over safety. Planes packed too close, fuel drums unprotected, ammunition stored on the line. It was an engineer's nightmare and a tactician's dream. He'd turned that flaw into a weapon. For military historians, this would later be called tactical amplification, the use of the enemy's own logistics to magnify limited firepower. But for Stout, it was pure instinct. He circled once more, assessing damage. Half the field gone, dozens of planes burning, the rest scattered, men screaming, chaos everywhere. Most pilots would have left. He'd achieved the impossible alone. But war doesn't reward enough, and Stout wasn't wired to leave half a threat alive. He could see anti-aircraft crews regrouping near the southern edge, setting up 20mm cannons on sandbags. They had range, they had time, and if he came back the same way, they'd cut him to pieces. That was the risk. That was the point. He angled the Hellcat south, climbing higher, thinking 3 moves ahead like a chess player. If he came in from a new direction, low, diagonal, opposite the smoke, the Japanese would have seconds to react. Seconds they didn't have. In the cockpit, he wiped sweat from his eyes, checked his ammo, 1 belt, half empty, 1 full. Enough for 1 more pass. That's all it would take. His breathing steadied. The plane trembled slightly, wounded but obedient. He looked down again at the inferno spreading below, and whispered not a prayer, but a promise. You're not launching anything today. He banked right, rolled inverted, and began his second dive. The sky filled with tracers almost immediately. Japanese gunners had found their aim, and the air around him turned into a lattice of fire. But the Hellcat was built for punishment. He zigzagged through the storm, every instinct, every muscle memory honed by 63 missions. And in that chaos amid the heat, the smoke, the roar, Stout's war stopped being about orders or duty. It became about timing, pure precision. Every second a choice between life and death, every decision carved into muscle before thought could catch up. The Hellcat's wings trembled as Stout leveled out from his first attack. He'd done the impossible, and he knew it. Half the airfield was burning, 40,000 gallons of aviation fuel feeding a firestorm that painted the sky black. But victory had a way of lying to pilots. It made them forget how fast luck runs out. The control stick felt heavier now. The right aileron lagged a fraction of a second behind each input. A glance at the panel told him why the hydraulic pressure needle was dancing near the red. The plane was bleeding. He could leave. Every instinct screamed it. He'd done enough. Proved his point. Saved the invasion force already. But the other half of that field, 20 more aircraft, untouched, waited like coiled vipers. He couldn't ignore them. And this was where great pilots separate from the rest. They see a battlefield not as a risk, but as a puzzle. Every gun position, every puff of flak, every shadow on the ground data. And data meant options. Stout climbed into a wide turn, smoke trailing behind him, heart rate slowing. He'd come in from the east last time. Now he'd attack from the south against the wind, below the smoke line, where the Japanese wouldn't expect him. It was textbook unpredictability, the same principle every modern air combat manual would later teach. Never repeat what just worked. The enemy adapts faster than luck. He dropped flaps slightly, rolled the aircraft inverted, and dove again. The altimeter spun 3,000, 2,000, 1,200 feet. Then the sky lit up. Tracer fire erupted from the jungle perimeter, red, green, and white streaks slicing upward. The Japanese had regrouped fast. 20mm flak guns, maybe 4 or 5, firing blind through the smoke, but with deadly density. Stout juked hard left, then right short, violent bursts of motion to spoil their aim. At 400 miles an hour, each move was a bet with physics. Shells burst around him, fragments slashing through the canopy. A sharp crack, something punched through the fuselage behind his seat. The cockpit filled with the bitter smell of hydraulic fluid. He didn't flinch. He couldn't. The southern row came into view. A line of bombers, engines idling, fuel trucks beside them. Perfect targets. He steadied the stick, aligned the crosshair, and squeezed the trigger. The 6 Brownings thundered again, flames spitting from the wingtips. Tracers walked across the field fuel truck first. The rounds tore into the tank, and the explosion was instant, blinding white fire rolling outward in a perfect circle. The shockwave flipped a bomber onto its back like a toy. Another detonation followed, secondary ammunition cooking off, a chain of concussions that rolled through the tarmac. One anti-aircraft gun managed to return fire. Its tracers slashed across the Hellcat's right wing. Metal shrieked. The plane jerked. Warning lights flared. Hydraulic failure imminent. Stout didn't care. He held the trigger until the guns clicked dry. No ammunition left. 12 seconds gone. He pulled up hard. Engines screaming. The damaged Hellcat groaning in protest. For a moment, gravity pinned him to the seat so hard his vision blurred. Then he broke through the smoke into clean air, sunlight hitting the canopy. The entire world below him consumed in fire. From 3,000 feet up, it was apocalyptic. The entire airfield burned end to end, columns of smoke twisting together into a single black funnel that reached toward the sky. Every aircraft was gone, every structure flattened or aflame. The Japanese defense network erased in 8 minutes. And that's when the real battle began, staying alive. He leveled out, felt the controls resist him, the plane pulling left, sluggish, unbalanced. The rudder pedals creaked under his boots. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the floor in thin, misty streams. Oil pressure dropping, temperature climbing. He was still 20 miles from the ocean, 40 from the fleet. And beneath him an island full of soldiers now realizing who'd just destroyed their air power. Below, anti-aircraft gunners fired blindly into the sky, their shells bursting hundreds of feet short. He watched one burst of flak bloom right below his tail, too close. The shockwave rocked the plane violently. The canopy cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across the glass. He ducked instinctively, pressing himself low, feeling heat crawl up from the engine bay. Every pilot knows that smell: hot oil on metal. It means your engine is seconds from seizing. But the Hellcat was built to take punishment. It was the Navy's workhorse, heavy, ugly, indestructible, designed to get you home when everything else had gone to hell. And on this day, it was living up to its reputation. Stout trimmed the nose down slightly, coaxing more airspeed out of the wounded bird. The controls fought him every inch. His hands ached from tension, but the gauges still showed life. RPM stable, fuel pressure holding. He could make it. Maybe. From this altitude, he could see the horizon. And beyond it, a faint gray smear that was the Hornet. Home, safety, maybe redemption. He didn't smile. There was no victory in it, only relief. He'd made his choice, survived his gamble, and rewritten what a single pilot could do. But the cost was still climbing with every warning light that flickered. 8 minutes of combat, the narrator intones. And the war had changed. 1 man, 1 aircraft, 40 enemies gone. Now, the question was simple. Could he survive the return? The smoke of Peleliu shrank behind him, but it refused to leave his mind. The fire below still raged, a black column twisting up through the blue. His signature burned into the sky. Robert Cowboy Stout was alive, but his Hellcat was coming apart. The control stick shuddered with every gust. The right wing flexed unnaturally, a metallic groan echoing through the fuselage each time he turned. Hydraulic pressure sat barely above zero. The warning lights fuel leak, oil temperature, landing gear uncertain. All blinked in angry red rhythm. He was 30 miles from the Hornet. At 400 miles an hour, that was 10 minutes. A lifetime when your aircraft is dying, one system at a time. Pilots called it the silent countdown. Every sound in the cockpit became a question. Was that the engine misfiring? Was that the pump failing? Was that the beginning of the end? Stout's breathing slowed. He'd been here before, not in this exact moment, but in the same state of clarity that visits men who've already accepted death. It wasn't fear anymore. It was focus. He trimmed the elevators manually, compensating for the dead hydraulics. The Hellcat responded sluggishly, but it responded. That was enough. Below, the ocean stretched out endless, silver, indifferent. He switched to the emergency frequency. Static filled the headphones. Then a voice. Hornet Control. This is Stout. Aircraft damaged. Request emergency recovery. No reply. He tried again. Louder. The second call broke through the static. Copy, Stout. You're reading 1/5. State condition. Hydraulic failure. Minor oil leak. Possible gear damage. Returning from Recon with complications. There was a pause. Even through the static, he could sense confusion on the other end. Recon missions weren't supposed to come back shot up. Understood. You are cleared for priority landing. We'll turn into the wind. The words felt heavier than they should have. Priority landing meant everyone else was ordered off the deck. It also meant the crew was expecting wreckage. He looked ahead. The horizon shimmered. Then, like an apparition, the gray hull of the USS Hornet emerged from the haze. A steel island moving through a sea of whitecaps. He'd seen that sight dozens of times before, but never like this. Never as salvation. The Hornet turned into the wind, the deck crew scrambling into position. Fire crews, crash net, recovery wires armed. They'd heard the radio tone in his voice. The one pilots used when they weren't sure they'd make it back. Stout throttled down slightly, checking his gear indicators. 2 green lights, 1 red. The right wheel wasn't locking. He cycled it again. Still red. He could attempt a belly landing, but on a carrier deck, that was suicide. He had one option left. Trust gravity, timing, and muscle memory. He aligned with the deck, crosshair centered on the white line painted down the middle. Waves pitched below. Wind, sheer, buffeted the plane. The Hornet's deck officer waved him in. Stout dropped speed to 140 knots, kept his nose slightly high, and prayed the arresting hook would catch. The Hellcat slammed onto the deck, metal screeching, sparks flying as the right wheel collapsed. The hook caught the second wire. Momentum snapped him forward, shoulder harness biting deep into his chest. For 3 seconds, the plane fought to stay upright. Then it stopped dead, smoking, alive. Crewmen ran from every corner of the deck. One grabbed a fire extinguisher, another yanked the canopy open. The cockpit reeked of oil, cordite, and sweat. When Stout climbed out, his legs almost gave way. The first officer on deck stared at the damage. Tail shredded, fuselage peppered with holes, paint scorched black from flying through fire. He looked at Stout, puzzled. "You were Recon. What the hell happened out there?" Stout didn't answer immediately. He just handed over the camera, the same one that had been meant to record enemy positions. "You'll see soon enough," he said quietly. "There's nothing left to photograph." Behind him, the deck crew stood silently, watching the smoke still rising from Peleliu. They didn't know it yet, but they were looking at the aftermath of one of the most destructive solo attacks in U.S. naval history. For a few minutes, no one on the flight deck spoke. The roar of engines faded, replaced by the low hiss of fire extinguishers and the metallic groans of cooling steel. Stout stood beside his battered Hellcat, helmet under one arm, uniform streaked with oil and smoke. He looked less like a hero and more like a man who had walked out of an explosion. The air boss approached, first clipboard in hand, voice clipped. Professional. Reconnaissance pilot returns with combat damage. That's a first. Behind him came the squadron commander, the intelligence officer, a handful of deckhands craning for a look. Questions flew faster than bullets. Why the damage? Why the radio silence? Why the smoke column visible from 50 miles away? Stout didn't argue. He didn't boast. He simply handed over the camera. You'll want to develop these right now. The intelligence officer frowned. What are we looking for, Major? Confirmation, Stout replied. And context. The rolls of film disappeared into the photo lab. For half an hour, the carrier buzzed with rumor. Pilots whispered about the lone Hellcat that came back, scorched black. Deck crews pointed toward the horizon, where the column of smoke still coiled above Peleliu like a monument. When the photos came back, the room went silent. Aerial frames, taken automatically during Stout's final passes, told the story better than words ever could. The northern airfield, gone. Rows of aircraft reduced to twisted skeletons. Fuel dumps obliterated. Structures flattened or burning. In one frame, flames stretched the entire length of the runway. A single, continuous inferno. The intelligence officer blinked twice, speechless. How many planes did you say there were? 40, Stout answered. There aren't any now. The captain of the Hornet was summoned. Then the group commander. Then messages began flashing up the chain, each one more disbelieving than the last. A reconnaissance pilot had, on his own initiative, eliminated the entire Japanese air presence on Peleliu. No support, no orders, no permission. By the next morning, fresh reconnaissance confirmed it. Every aircraft destroyed. Fuel storage gone. Runway cratered from secondary explosions. Not a single plane operational. The Japanese garrison, once confident, was suddenly blind and powerless. When the Marines landed 3 days later, they faced heavy ground resistance, but no air attacks. Not one. Historians would later calculate the cost avoided. 500 to 1,000 lives saved in the first 24 hours of the invasion. Without Stout's action, those 40 aircraft would have struck during the amphibious landings, when Marines were trapped in open boats, unable to maneuver or take cover. It would have been a massacre. And yet, in that moment aboard the Hornet, Stout wasn't celebrated. He was interrogated. The Navy didn't like variables, especially ones that didn't follow the manual. To some, he was reckless. To others, insubordinate. He had violated mission parameters, risked a valuable aircraft, and acted without approval. But the facts refused to bend. He'd achieved in 8 minutes what an entire bomber squadron might not have managed in a day. And the proof, undeniable, photographic, statistical, sat on the table in front of them. The debate reached the task force commander. Court-martial or commendation? The answer came down to intent. Had Stout acted for glory or necessity? Had he disobeyed orders or fulfilled them by understanding their purpose better than the men who wrote them? The Navy called it command intent. The unwritten principle that says a leader's real order isn't what's typed on paper, but what the situation demands. Stout's mission had been reconnaissance in support of the Peleliu landings. He had supported them perfectly, just not the way the manual prescribed. In the end, the decision was unanimous. Robert Cowboy, Stout would not face punishment. He would receive the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in combat. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and aggressive fighting spirit in attacking superior enemy forces alone, thereby contributing directly to the success of amphibious operations at Peleliu." When they pinned the medal on his uniform, he didn't smile. He just said quietly, I saw planes that needed destroying, so I destroyed them. No speech, no theatrics. Just the blunt truth of a man who'd chosen action over procedure. When the war ended, Robert Cowboy Stout went home quietly. No parade, no interviews, just a train ride back to California and a return to the kind of peace only men who've seen fire can truly appreciate. He opened a small workshop, fixed tractors for local farmers, and raised a family that knew almost nothing about what he'd done over Peleliu. The Navy Cross sat in a drawer, not displayed, not mentioned. His children later said they found out about the mission from a neighbor, not from their father. That was the kind of man he was. Not one to talk, not one to explain. He'd done what needed doing, that was enough. But history has a way of finding the stories it needs. Decades later, military historians came across the mission reports from USS Hornet. They cross-referenced the Navy Cross citation with Japanese records and aerial photos. What they found stunned them. Every detail checked out. 8 minutes, 40 aircraft, 1 pilot. In military terms, it was a statistical impossibility. No other naval aviator in World War II destroyed that many enemy planes in a single mission, not even with a full squadron. And yet, buried in an archive, that record sat untouched for half a century. When the story resurfaced, it forced military scholars to confront a question that still defines leadership today. When is disobedience the highest form of duty? The U.S. Navy would later use Stout's decision as a case study in tactical initiative, a lesson in the delicate balance between discipline and judgment, because war, like leadership, rarely fits the manual. Most organizations, military or civilian, build layers of control to avoid mistakes. But those same layers can suffocate initiative, and initiative is what saves lives when everything falls apart. Stout's attack became more than a war story. It became a doctrine. Modern fighter pilots study it under a concept called commander's intent. The rule is simple: obey the purpose of your orders, not the words written in them. If the situation changes, adapt. If communication breaks, act on what you see, not on what you're told. Because by the time the message travels up and back down the chain of command, the battlefield has already changed. That's what Stout understood instinctively. He didn't rebel. He aligned himself with the real objective: protect the invasion fleet, and executed it with precision and courage that no manual could teach. It wasn't luck. It was clarity. In interviews years later, one of his fellow pilots said, "Cowboy wasn't fearless. He was honest. He saw the truth and didn't wait for permission to act on it." And that might be the rarest kind of courage. The kind that lives not in defiance, but in responsibility. Think about it. Every great innovation, every turning point, starts with someone who saw what others refused to see, and had the nerve to move before it was safe to do so. Robert Stout didn't just change the outcome of a single battle. He challenged the culture of obedience itself. Today, the story of Peleliu isn't taught for its explosions. It's taught for its insight, for reminding leaders that procedure is not purpose, and that the most dangerous phrase in any command structure is still. We'll deal with it in the morning. His Hellcat, number 36, was scrapped after the war. The airframe too damaged to preserve, the paint still scorched from that day in 1944. Only fragments remain. A propeller blade in a museum, and a medal that sat quietly in a drawer until the day he died. Robert Cowboy Stout passed away in 2005, at 89 years old. New headlines, new ceremony, just family and silence. But among aviators, the kind who still talk about wind, instinct, and gut feeling, his name carries weight. Because in their world, you don't measure a man by how many orders he followed, but by how many lives he saved when those orders stopped making sense. And that's the legacy he left behind. 1 man, 1 aircraft, 8 minutes. A decision that redefined what leadership means. Sometimes, the narrator's voice lowers, the bravest act isn't facing the enemy, it's facing your own chain of command, and choosing, for once, to think instead of obey. Fade to black. The faint hum of a Hellcat engine echoes one last time. Then silence.